One of the great things about the path that I'm on is I'm blessed to encounter people who really are life-changing people. And along the way, a few months ago, I was able to meet someone that I was incredibly impressed with. His name's Jason Henderson. He's known as Hendo, and he's a retired Navy SEAL Master Chief. And I'm going to give you this background, but what I'm going to show you is the person he is encompasses so much more than even this background, which, by the way, is one of the most impressive backgrounds you will ever hear. So listen to this. He's done 16 combat deployments. That's 16 tours. He has black belts in JUDO and JUDO. He is a naval special operations combatives instructor, a small arms instructor, a range safety officer, a breathing instructor, a breathology master instructor specializing in PTSD management. And more than anything, for those of you who have tuned into this channel, you know that one of the statements that I vibe on is this, and I live by, is the world has many gurus, but few masters. Gurus know their subjects, but masters know themselves. And one of the first things I noticed about Hendo and was blown away with him was this: he lives his message. So first of all, Hendo, welcome to my YouTube channel. I feel beyond honored that you're here with me and able to share this message with this audience.
Yeah, thanks, Doc. I appreciate you having me on. Yeah, we talk about gurus and mastery. I don't think there is any mastery. You can't master anything, but that's the goal, right? That's our intent, is to try and keep pushing towards betterment.
That's it. Life, and we're lifelong learners. I think those of us who've done this long enough understand that no matter what you know, you'll never scratch the surface of all there is to know. So we know that we live in a world that's so fast paced right now that even though self improvement takes focus, it takes self discipline, it takes patience. The reality is that people want information quickly, at least to say, hey, is this worth pursuing? So one of the things that Hendo and I stepped back and said is, how can we just present self-improvement? So what we're going to brainstorm is this. We're going to talk about 3 ways that you can work on your self-improvement. These are 3 very important things that you can do to work on your self-improvement. And the way I frame this is this: Hendo, based on your experiences as a Navy SEAL, doing everything that you've done in your life, what is maybe the first thing that you would say to people in regard to what they can do for self-improvement?
Yeah, first and foremost, you have to have a clearly defined mission. I see it, especially with combat veterans and first responders. After they retire, they've kind of lost their mission and they've lost their way. So finding and clearly defining what is your mission and what is your purpose, really, and do it all with intent. There's people go, okay, what's your goal? That's not what I'm talking about with a mission, because within goals there's sub goals and micro goals and macro goals and tasks and all these things that build out into it. That's all tactical. I'm talking about from a overarching strategic point of view. What is the mission?
Mm. That's enormous. So that immediately that resonates. And there's so much. It's interesting because that's real world life experience. And there's tons of research that backs that up in saying that the more clear you are with your goals, the more likely you are to achieve them. I'd say my first goal towards my first advice for self-improvement is accurate language. So I see a lot of people struggle with exaggerating things. This always happens to me. This never goes my way. And I came up with this technique. I call it sans adjectives, which is you just take away the adjectives and describe whatever's going on in your life with the most accurate language possible, no adjectives. And what I would say to all of you out there is this: start with your self-talk, wipe away the adjectives in your own mind, and then also in your communication with others, be clear and accurate. So that's my first one. What about your second one? What would you say for your second tip?
Learn to mitigate, and really you can weaponize stress. Use stress as a fuel. And everybody, you can't stop it from happening. If you look towards the future, it's always filled with anxiety. So when you start doing like you said, you take out those adjectives. You have a very clearly defined path. All of your goals are laid out towards your mission. then that's the best way to start mitigating stress.
To me, that's fantastic. And that kind of goes with my second one. And just so the audience realizes, we didn't plan any of this. We didn't talk about any of what we were going to say. We just said, let's talk about some concepts for self improvement. But my second one is, I think, one of the more profound things I've ever encountered, which is that our minds always want to match our bodies. So if we're amped up on, let's say, too much caffeine, then our body's going to mimic anxiety, and then we'll create a story to make sense out of why our body feels anxious. And oftentimes that story isn't the simple truth of, wow, I had a little too much caffeine. Instead, it's, oh, it must be you. We never finished that argument from 3 weeks ago. And then we start to create a story to match how we feel. So be mindful that your mind always wants to match your body, and be aware to limit the stories that you tell yourself. How about number three? What would you give them for the third tip on self-improvement?
Well, if I talk about now, I'm talking about defining your mission. If I'm talking about the future, I'm talking about mitigating stress and anxiety. So, third, I would want to look to the past, and I'd really be proactive in managing your trauma, because the trauma can snowball and become a big thing, and it'll limit you. And you talked about limitations and roadblocks that stop you from your path, and that litany of excuses that you roll out of the matrix, from the Rolodex of excuses that people pull out. Is if you can start proactively managing what's hindering you, then you'll be much more active in how you go forward.
So recognizing it, recognizing what it is that's hindering you, which means you have to put the effort into exploring it. And I know that's scary for people because they think, oh, it's going to bring up a bunch of stuff. So I guess that would also balance on my third tip, and that is this. I talk about the difference between what I call the cartoon world, which is our world of shoulds. This is how the world should be. And then the real world, how the world actually is. And I've spent a career devoted toward helping people align their expectations with reality. Because the more you expect reality, the more likely you are to be prepared for it. So I would say, try to do your best to get out of that cartoon world and get into the real world. Look, these three tips, like, you've had this lifetime of experience where you're going into some of the most difficult real world conflict. Like, your conflict that you're experiencing isn't Starbucks didn't make my drink correctly. Like, you've dealt with some of this real world stuff. So when people get started, and they might look at you and say, well, how can I get there? What kind of advice do you have for them to even get started in pursuing these, well, now 6 goals that we've given them?
Well, you got to take the first step, right? And we talked about definitions. So sit down and write out what your plan is, write out what your goal is. And then there's a lot of steps that are built into it. In the SEALs, we have, when we look at our mission, it really just starts with an intel officer coming up and pointing out a dot on a map and saying that's where our objective is going to be. There's nothing you can see on the map that's going to show you anything that is going to happen on the mission. So from there, I'm going straight into, where am I going to insert? How am I going to get there? How am I going to infiltrate? What is my paths? What are my actions on the objective going to be? What are my post actions on the objective going to be? How am I going to exfil from there? How am I going to extract from there? Then what are my after actions and all this? And then I have to have all these contingency plans, what we talked about with roadblocks, all these different things that are going to pop up in front of me. What if my helo crashes? What if my vehicle breaks down? The same thing translates in life. You and I talk about doing some projects together in the future. It isn't just us going, okay, well, let's do some projects. Being we're there, and all of a sudden we're in front of a crowd talking, even though we have in fact done improvisational thing and presenting before, and I enjoy that type of a challenge. But it's the same type of thing. How am I going to get up to where you live? What if the vehicle breaks down en route? What if my plane breaks down? So all these different steps of the way, I have to have contingency plans built along the way, so that I'm just fluid, and no matter what negative things pop in front of me, I can guide my way through them and get my objective met.
I think that's the mindset that is beyond impressive. It's not complex. It is that you live constantly looking and saying what might come up. And I think understanding this obstacles might come up, and not panicking because the world doesn't unfold exactly the way we think it should unfold. I was telling this to my wife the other day. I said, my mindset is, what can I do? I don't have time to think about what won't work. I don't waste time on what won't work. I only focus on what can be done. I watched that in you. What I want our audience to understand is this: we're going to do even a much longer video for you. We're going to have a whole bunch of stuff that we're working on together. But for now, think about these 3 tips that each of us have given you. So 6 total tips on how you can begin self-improvement right now. And then how can people get a hold of you or see your work? What's the best way for them to see your work and get a hold of you?
I have 2 different companies. I have Henderson Security Consultancy, which is at hendosec.com. There, I do a lot of different trainings, but mostly it's for families. I teach families how to be safe in these dangerous times. Um, a lot of the people who I'm training is kids that are getting ready to go off to college or leave the nest, and parents are like, "Hey, I've got them prepared academically, but from a situational awareness standpoint, they're not quite ready." So I do that. I do some bodyguarding and stuff, of course, but mostly where I'm focused is trying to heal families and empower them to be more protective and live a safer life. And then my nonprofit is Four Pillars Collective at fourpillarscollective.com, and that's where I take donated money and I train officers throughout the U.S. in security, mostly defensive tactics, but built into it is also emotional intelligence and stress mitigation and all the things the officers need to be more successful in this new era.
I want to highlight both of those. I really encourage all of you to go out and look at this, both for what you talked about for preparing children who are going off to college, because I know that my wife and I have a daughter who's in that boat. And you're right, 100%. We constantly think about all the facets of life. So I would strongly encourage everyone to go out there and look at that aspect of what you're doing. And then I would also strongly invite, encourage, and ask for people to look into this nonprofit that you're doing, because you're quite literally making the world a safer place. People talk so much stuff about, oh, I want to do this, I want to do that, but you're living the message and you're doing it. So I would ask my audience to go out there and look at this nonprofit, because this is something that will quite literally make the world safer with what you're doing. I feel like I said this before. I wrote this in one of my books. I wrote this little article on, in life there is no mic drop. And they have rap battles where they drop the mic when they're done. Like I got nothing. No one can say anything else. But I say in life, that's not true. There's so much more to talk about. You and I have so much more to talk about and to share with this audience. So I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. And I want you to know that stay tuned. There's going to be a whole lot more. Please check out Hendo and what he's doing on the private side, and then also with the nonprofit side. I promise you, I only bring people on that I'm truly honored to be around. So Hendo, thanks again for doing this.
Yeah, thanks, Doc.
Until next time, as always, I wish you much peace.